By ICE and mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. The White House continues to push back on bringing Kilmar Abrego Garcia home, dismissing recent court rulings requiring the DOJ to take more action than it has shown so far. Joining us now is Josh Gerstein with Politico. Thank you so much for joining us, Josh.
Sure, Michelle, good to be with you.
So President Trump was joined by the president of El Salvador this morning at the White House. The Trump administration doubling down, saying Abrego Garcia doesn't belong in the U.S. and we have no authority to ask El Salvador to bring him back. What was your read on what we heard from the White House on this case?
Well, this was kind of a surprising situation where you have the president basically locking arms with a foreign leader to thwart the will of the U.S. courts. The courts have been pretty clear that the administration needed to, at a minimum, facilitate Abrego Garcia's return from El Salvador, which I think most people have interpreted to mean that they needed to work with the government of El Salvador to try to get him released so he could come back to the U.S. But it appears that President Trump and President Bekele of El Salvador are taking a unified position that Abrego Garcia should remain in that prison in El Salvador, even though it's not clear to me on what grounds he's being confined there. So it's an unusual standoff that the U.S. courts are facing at the moment, and they're going to have to address in very short order.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like President Trump has asked or made the request from the country.
No, there's no indication that he's done that. And in fact, in court, they've said that the judge doesn't have any authority to order the president or the executive branch to make that kind of effort. It's a little surprising to me if people remember the years of litigation over the cases involving the men that were at Guantanamo. There were many court orders requiring various administrations to negotiate with foreign governments to try to find places for those prisoners down there to be sent. So it's not that unusual to have an order of this sort, but the Trump administration is insisting it's an intrusion on their authority, and therefore they're interpreting it very narrowly. Attorney General Pam Bondi said at that Oval Office press opportunity that all they're required to do is provide a plane if for some reason El Salvador were to release him.
Yeah, let's go to some of the sound from the Oval today. Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, he spoke on the matter today. He said Abrego Garcia has no future in the United States. So let's listen to some of what the president of El Salvador said about that case.
How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
All right, so you have two presidents essentially saying that they're powerless, which is pretty absurd. Legally, what are the next steps for this family, local family, who wants to see their loved one return?
Well, the lawyers for the family are asking the judge in Maryland, Paula Zinnes, to order various officials of the Trump administration, people from the Homeland Security Department, the State Department, and other agencies to come into court for a scheduled hearing that's set for tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock in Greenbelt, and explain what they're doing or not doing in this case. And then the judge would have the opportunity to make some kind of further order about what should proceed here. But, you know, that statement from the president of El Salvador is a little hard to understand. You have one hand saying, like, we can't facilitate his return, and the other hand saying that we can't smuggle him into the U.S., where, you know, I don't think anybody's talking about smuggling anyone into the U.S. The courts are the ones saying that the U.S. has to take all steps necessary to get him back here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this standoff between the executive branch and the judicial branch sorts itself out.
And we heard language today calling Abrego Garcia a terrorist. And I think in the fog of all of this remains this claim without evidence that he has ties to MS-13. What is your reporting telling you about that element of this?
Well, it's certainly clear whether there's any current evidence that he has ties to MS-13. There was a allegation that he was a member of MS-13 that the judge there in Maryland said seemed to be based on flimsy evidence and no evidence that was actually brought in front of her. It was apparently the fact that he was wearing an outfit that included a Chicago Bulls cap was part of the evidence, and that some informant had said that he was a member of a gang, but he was never charged with being a member of a gang. And, in fact, the police who briefly picked him up released him. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence on the public record that he's a member of MS-13. And you would think that if the Trump administration had more proof on that front, they would have put it forward by this point, and we haven't heard about it. And these are events that date back to 2019, and he came into the country in 2011. And so, what the current indication is that he's a gang member, we've just seen no evidence whatsoever to prove that at this point.
And this has created a great sense of fear, of course, for the immigrant community. What are you hearing from advocates and immigration lawyers? What are they now telling their clients with protected status?
Well, I think for the moment, the repeal of the protective status is on hold, but a lot of those court cases are being challenged by the Trump administration. I have to say, I think this protected status does not really amount to very much at this point for people that have it, given the variety of steps that the administration has taken to strip people not only of protected status, which is a pretty low rung on sort of the immigration framework, but even people that have green cards, which is sort of the highest you can get on the immigration framework in terms of being entitled to live in the U.S. permanently. We've seen people in that category that have been arrested and attempted to be put into summary deportation proceedings as well. So it doesn't seem like for any non-U.S. citizens there's any sort of guarantee at this point that they won't be subject to some kind of immigration court action.
Josh Gerstein with Politico, always a pleasure to have you on. We hope you'll join us again pretty soon.
Anytime.